Baghdad. Hundreds of thousands of mourners poured into the streets of Iran on Sunday to pay their respects to the slain leader of the elite Quds force, Major General Qasem Soleimani, as lawmakers in Iraq prepared to meet in parliament to consider the demands of angry citizens to expel United States troops from the country. The body of General Soleimani, the most powerful figure in Iran after the supreme leader, was brought back early Sunday from Iraq, where he was killed in an American drone strike on Friday near the Baghdad airport. Among the 4 others who died were Abu Mahdi al-Muhandis, the deputy head of the Iraqi Popular Mobilization Forces, which includes at least half a dozen pro-Iranian militias. The drone killing unleashed calls for vengeance in both countries and reinforced a general solidarity among hardliners and moderates in Iran against the United States. In Iraq, the attack was seen as a violation of the nation's sovereignty. In Iran, it was tantamount to an act of war. As the Middle East braced for Iran's response, which analysts said was all but inevitable and American officials said they expected within weeks, both sides ratcheted up the rhetoric. Iranian members of parliament chanted, "Death to America," in the chamber on Sunday in protest over General Soleimani's killing, according to television footage. The chants came as President Trump, who ordered the drone strike, wrote a series of Twitter reposts to the growing anger, including that the United States had pinpointed 52 targets in Iran, including cultural sites, if there were to be any retaliation for the killing. He said they represented the 52 Americans hostages taken by Iran many years ago at the United States Embassy. That led Iran's foreign minister, Mohammad Javad Zarif, to respond on Twitter that targeting cultural sites is a war crime. He said that the end of U.S. malign presence in West Asia has begun. Iran also summoned the Swiss envoy representing American interests in Tehran on Sunday to protest Mr. Trump's threat that Washington would target Iranian sites. Iran's Information and Telecommunications Minister, Mohammad Javad Azari Yaromi, tweeted on Sunday that Mr. Trump was a terrorist in a suit. Like ISIS, like Hitler, like Genghis. They all hate cultures. Trump is a terrorist in a suit. He will learn history very soon that nobody can defeat the great Iranian nation and culture, Mr. Yaromi wrote. The drone attack left America's European allies scrambling to address the safety of their troops in the Middle East and complaining that they had been given no warning about the strike. But European leaders also called for de-escalation between Iran and the United States. The European Union's foreign policy chief, Josep Borrell, invited Mr. Zarif to Brussels for talks. Mr. Borrell said in a statement that he had spoken to Iran's foreign minister, urging Iran to exercise restraint and carefully consider any reaction to avoid further escalation, which harms the entire region and its people. Germany's foreign minister, Heiko Maas, said that he would seek direct talks with Iran after the American killing of General Soleimani. Europe wants to continue the fight against the Islamic State, Mr. Maas said, and Germany is anxious about the safety of its troops training Iraqi fighters against the Islamic State militants. The European outreach came as the United States and its NATO allies suspended training Iraqi forces for security reasons after the killing of General Soleimani. Germany's defense minister, Annegret Kramp-Karrenbauer, said in a statement, "Iraq cannot be allowed to sink into chaos, and certainly not under the control of extremists. Therefore, it is important not to let up now in the fight against Islamic State." In general, the Europeans did not specifically criticize Mr. Trump for his decision, and generally share the American view that Iran has been a destabilizing force in the Middle East and a supporter of terrorism. At the same time, no European government praised the killing of General Soleimani, emphasizing instead the increased risks to their citizens, troops, and interests. Prime Minister Boris Johnson of Britain was reported to be angry with Mr. Trump for not informing him or other allies with troops in Iraq about the decision to kill General Soleimani. While carried out by the Americans, the killing is thought to have put all European citizens and troops in Iraq and the wider region at heightened risk. Mr. Johnson, who was reported to be returning early from a vacation in the Caribbean, is expected to discuss the issues with Chancellor Angela Merkel of Germany, President Emmanuel Macron of France and Mr. Trump in the next few days, a Downing Street spokeswoman said. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo complained that the response by European allies had not been helpful. He told Fox News in an interview, "Frankly, the Europeans haven't been as helpful as I wish that they could be. The Brits, the French, the Germans all need to understand that what we did, what the Americans did, saved lives in Europe as well." Foreign Minister Dominic Raab of Britain, who is scheduled to travel to Washington this week to meet Mr. Pompeo, said that any country had a right to defend itself. Asked in an interview with the BBC whether the killing was legal, Mr. Raab said, "There is a right of self-defense." He said he did not agree that the killing was an act of war, and described General Soleimani to Sky News, another British broadcaster, as a regional menace. But Mr. Raab also said that he had spoken to Iraq's Prime Minister and President to urge a de-escalation of tensions in the region, and that he planned to speak to Iran's foreign minister. In particular, the Europeans are trying to persuade Iran to keep to the 2015 nuclear deal, known as the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, which President Trump pulled the United States out of in May 2018, reimposing harsh economic sanctions on Tehran. Since then, Iran has slowly abandoned its adherence to parts of the deal. On Sunday, Iran said it would decide its next step to further roll back its commitments to the deal, according to a foreign ministry spokesman. "Tonight, there will be a very important meeting to decide about our next nuclear step and the implementation of the deal considering the recent threats," the state news agency IRNA quoted the spokesman, Abbas Mousavi, as saying. The Europeans are also working to keep the Strait of Hormuz open to shipping. About 1/3 of the world's oil tankers use the waterway, which Iran has intermittently threatened to close. Last July, Iranian forces boarded and seized a British-flagged tanker in the strait, trying to pressure the world to allow its oil exports despite American sanctions. On Saturday, Britain's Defence Minister, Ben Wallace, said he had ordered the country's navy to accompany all British-flagged ships through the Strait of Hormuz. France has also stepped up diplomatic initiatives to ease tensions. Mr. Macron spoke to President Barham Saleh of Iraq and the de facto ruler of the United Arab Emirates, Crown Prince Mohammed bin Zayed of Abu Dhabi. Even as the Europeans scrambled on several fronts, the coffin of General Soleimani arrived in Awaz, in southwestern Iran, a place with a significant ethnic Arab population. The region has not always supported the government, and many citizens joined the recent protests against the regime. But they are united in their support for General Soleimani, a figure they viewed as larger than life. Amir, a 35-year-old businessman and resident of Awaz who asked that his last name not be used for security reasons, attended the funeral and said that although he did not support Iran's government, General Soleimani's killing had touched a nationalist nerve. "The attack really wounded and insulted the national pride of Iranians," he said. "I went to show my solidarity and to say no to war with Iran." After Awaz, the general's body will be flown to Mashhad, a major religious center for Shiites in northeastern Iran. It will then be taken to Tehran, where a state funeral will be held on Monday. General Soleimani is expected to be buried in his hometown, Kerman, on Tuesday. The body of Mr. al-Muhandis is with the generals, but it is not clear whether he will also be buried in Iran or if his body will return to Najaf, Iraq, where almost all Iraqi Shiites are buried. Mr. al-Muhandis married an Iranian and became an Iranian citizen. In Iraq, Parliament is divided on demands to expel American troops from the country, and it is not clear whether those who want the United States to leave have the votes to pass a measure calling for it. While factions that grew out of Shiite militia organizations are pushing hard for the expulsion, Sunni Muslim factions and the Kurds want the United States to stay. The legal agreement between Baghdad and Washington states that American troops are in Iraq at the invitation of the Iraqi government. Presumably, if Baghdad withdrew that invitation, the United States would have to withdraw. It is not clear whether Iraq's executive branch has to initiate that request or whether Parliament can do so. It seems unlikely that the government could refuse to expel American troops if there were a clear majority in Parliament that wanted to. But Parliament needs a quorum even to meet, and as of 3:30 p.m. local time it did not have one. At the same time, Kataib Hezbollah, the armed group arguably closest to Iran, warned Iraqi troops on bases that also house United States troops that they should stay at least 3,000 feet from American counterparts starting on Sunday evening, and not allow themselves to be used as human shields. Alyssa J. Rubin reported from Baghdad, Stephen Erlanger from Brussels, and Farnaz Fasahi from New York.